In our lesson today, we're going to learn how to do some approximating of the square roots as our irrational numbers, and we're going to be focusing on how to approximate things to the nearest tenths place. So remember that we've talked about all square roots are not perfect squares, and we've talked about going through your multiplication doubles to figure out if something was rational or irrational. So your perfect squares are the numbers that are going to have the whole number square root. So those would be like your square root of 25, or the square root of 36, or the square root of 49. Those are all going to be under the rational numbers. But when you take the square root of a non-perfect square, you're going to get those irrational numbers because the decimal will not repeat and it will not terminate. What we're going to do today is go a step further with this and be able to not only say that they're irrational, but we're going to be able to approximate their value to the nearest tenths place. So just a quick review on your place value. If we're talking about the number 3.5, that's in the tenths place. So we want to have one digit past the decimal point for our answers. So we're going to use the square root of 38 as our first example. So I'm going to go through this. We're going to talk through the steps. I'm going to show you how you're going to be required to show the work. You know that you're not going to be allowed to use calculators on this, so showing your work is obviously going to be necessary, and you want to make sure that you're thinking through these in the correct way. So the very first thing that you need to do for step one is you need to decide, which we've been working on, which two whole numbers that your square root value is going to be in between. So you're going to want to think about your doubles of multiplication. You can use the chart that's on the board. If you have your own listed, if you want to make a list of all of your perfect squares, you can do that. So you're deciding which two whole numbers it would be. So for the square root of 38, I'm thinking about what can I get to be close to that, and I know that 6 times 6 equals 36, and that's below the 38, and so the next one would be 7 times 7, which would be 49. So I know that this is between 6 and 7. And so what I'm doing is I'm thinking about how I'm going to formulate my answer. I know I'm going to be doing this to the nearest tenths place. Right now, what this tells me is that I know my answer is going to be 6 point something. And my job now is to find out what that something is going to be that will be in the tenths place. So in order to do that efficiently and correctly, without we're going to try to eliminate as many steps as possible, because you're going to have to do a lot of multiplication by hand, and you don't want to get frustrated, so you want to do this in an efficient way. So after you know the two numbers, we're going to decide which of those it's going to be closest to. And we've talked about this again in the past. So we've got the number 36 and we've got 49, and the 38 is right in, it would go in there. We find that it's only 2 steps away from the 38, and it's a lot more to get to the 49. So we can tell that it's going to be closer to the 6. Once we have that established, so when we're thinking closer to the 6, remember that the halfway point would be 6.5. If we want it to be closer to the 6, we're going to want to go below the 6.5. So all we're going to do now is we're going to do some guess and check. And so that means we're going to start out with a certain decimal that we think would be a good one to start with. You want to do your guess and check in a smart way, because what we're going to have to do is we're going to have to multiply. So we're going to use guess and check to multiply until we get one answer that's smaller than our number. Our target number is the 38, and one answer that's bigger than your number. So you're going to have to show at least 2 different multiplication problems as you're doing this work. So what I'm thinking now is that at 6 point something, it's definitely closer to the 6 than it is to the 7. So the halfway mark would be 6.5. I want to go lower than 6.5. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start with 6.2. So I'm going to check it. 6.2, we know that to get a square root, it would be the number multiplied by itself. So I'm going to try 6.2 times 6.2, and that's why you've practiced the multiplication by hand in the warm-ups. So I'm going to do 2 times 2 is 4, and 6 times 2 is 12, and then I hold my place value. 6 times 2 is 12. Carry the tens. 6 times 6 is 36, plus the 1 that I carried over would be 37. And then I add those parts together, so I've got 4, 4, 8, and 3. And now I have 1 digit past the decimal here and 1 digit past the decimal there. That gives me 2 digits passed over here. Okay, so what I found is the number of 38.44. Now we're only estimating to the 10th place, so that's our 6.2. When I do 6.2 times 6.2, I get 38.4, which is actually bigger than 38. So I found something that's bigger than my target number. So what that means is I need to check the next place value down lower to get a smaller number. So the next place value down would be 6.1. So I'm going to check 6.1 times 6.1. And I do 1 times 1, and I do 6 times 1, and I hold my place value. Now I move over to 6 times 1 and 6 times 6. And I add 1 plus 0, 6 plus 6. 6 plus 1 is 7, 3 plus 0. And now I have again the 2 place values, so my number is 37.21. So I've decreased my place value now down to 6.1, and I found that I have a number that is smaller than my target number of 38. And so that means that we've established our correct two numbers. We know which two that this is going to be our options for our answer. What we want to do is we want to figure out which one is indeed the closest to the 38. So what we're going to compare here, if we go in and change color, we're going to compare. We've got our target number is 38. Our smallest number is 37.21. And our largest number is 38.44. I want to know which of those is actually closer to the 38. And so here we're going to maybe be doing some subtraction, or a lot of you could maybe do the mental math here. The 38.44 goes over 38 by 44 hundredths. Okay, so I know that that's 44 hundredths bigger. Now the 37.21, to get to the 38, if you're thinking through the mental math piece of this in the number sense, 33.21 is less than, 37.21 is less than 37 and a half. If it was 37 and a half, we would need 0.5 to get to 38, which is already bigger than the 0.44 that we would need to get to the 38.44. And so what that tells me is that the 38.4 is actually closer to the 38, and that means that my answer is going to be the 6.2 that I multiplied together to get my 38.44. So the final answer would be 6.2, and that would be the nearest tenth of a place value closest to what we could get to the 38. Okay, so we have two problems. What I would like you guys to do is kind of get a start on this, talk to your neighbor, see if you could go through the first couple steps to establish your two numbers that it's going to be between and which ones it's going to be closer to, and get an idea of which decimal you're going to want to use to start with. So I'm going to give you some time here to think about that with your partner, and then we'll come back and go through this example. Okay, so what we should have found here was that 17, if we do 4 times 4, we get 16. And if we do 5 times 5, we get 25. And so we're seeing that the square root of 17 is going to be between 4 and 5. And if it's between 4 and 5, setting up our answer, we know it's going to be 4 point something. Okay, the next step is to figure out which one it's closer to. We can tell here that 17 is only one spot away from 16. And so what we're going to want to do is try a number that's very close to 4 as our first guess and check. So when we're thinking about our decimal 4, then we could try 4.1 or 4.2 or 4.3. Because these numbers are small and I'm only one away from my target number of 17, I'm going to try something very small to start with. So I'm going to try 4.1 times 4.1. And this may not be the first thing that you started with, and that's okay. 1 times 1 is 1, 4 times 1 is 4. Hold my place value. 4 times 1 is 4, 4 times 4 is 16. Add together 1 plus 0, 4 plus 4, 0 plus 6, and 0 plus 1. I have 2 place values being used, so I'm going to put 2 in my answer. So I get 16.81. So right now I can see that that answer is below my target number of 17. So I'm going to try the next tenths place higher. So I'm going to go to 4.2 times 4.2. 2 times 2 is 4. 4 times 2 is 8. Hold my place value. 4 times 2 is 8. 4 times 4 is 16. Add together 4, 16, 7, and 1. And I get an answer of 17.64, which is now greater than the target number of 17. So I know that my answer is either going to be 4.1 or it's going to be 4.2. My next job is to find out which one it's actually closer to. So to do that, I can do my subtraction. So let's do the 16.81 first. So we're going to take the 17.00 and we're going to subtract the 16.81. And again, some of you are probably to the point where you could do that in your head, and that would be great. You don't need to do that in your head. We're going to need to do a lot of borrowing here, though, if we're going to do this the long way. So right now, I see that I cannot take 1 away from 0. I'm going to borrow from the 170 over here, and that would be 169. And then that would make a 10. So what I'm going to have is 10 minus 1, which would give me 9. 9 minus 8 is 1. And that's all I have left is 19 hundredths. Now if I go to the other one down here, so we're now going to check the 4. This would be the answer up here to the 4.1. Okay, now I'm going to check the 4.2. So that would be 17.64 minus the 17.00. And that's going to give me 0.64. So that's the answer for the 4.2. So what I'm going to look at now is which one is actually smaller amount, because this is how far it is away from our target. So I have 19 hundredths or I have 64 hundredths. And we can see that the 19 hundredths is actually closer, is the smaller of those two, which would make this one the correct answer that we want to use. And so our answer would be 4.1. Alright, I would like you guys to try this one from start to finish. Then I will have the answer up for you when you come back. So go ahead and start working with your neighbor. Decide which 2 whole numbers it's between. Get which one is closer to, and get your first guess and check going, and keep working from there. Okay, so I have worked through the problem here, noticing that the 2 whole numbers that I would want to use would be the 7 or the 8, and it's closer to the 7. And so what I did was I noticed it wasn't super close to the 49, so I started with 7.4 times 7.4. I got 54.76, which was too big. So I jumped down 1/10 and tried 7.3 times 7.3, and then I found my answer was 53.29, which was still too big because it's still greater than the 52. So I jumped down 1 more tenths place, tried 7.2 times 7.2, and I got 51.84, which was now smaller than my target number of 52. So I had found that my answer was either going to be 7.2 or 7.3, and so what I did was I went in and tried the 7.2, the 51.84, subtracting that, found that was to be 0.16 away, so 16 hundredths away, and then I went into the one before that, which would have been actually the 7.3. Not sure why that says 7.1 on there. So we checked that answer that we got 53.29, subtracted away the 52, which was our target, and got an answer of 1 and 29 hundredths. So because the 1 and 29 hundredths was bigger than the 16 hundredths, that means that this one would be our closer answer. So my final answer would be 7.2. That would be the only acceptable correct answer for these. So a final tip as you are getting ready to start working through these on your own, make sure that you're jumping, as you kind of watched how I did this one here, make sure you're jumping from 1/10th place down to the next. Don't go skipping around, because what could happen is you could miss the correct answer. So if I would have went for my 7.3 and said, oh, well, that's still too big, I'm going to jump down to 7.1, I would have missed the 7.2. So of course the 7.1 would have been smaller, but we would have missed the one that was right where we wanted it to be. So if you can do a good guess and check estimate the first time, you're going to have a good place to start from with only jumping down to the next 10th place or up to the next 10th place. So be very careful while you're doing your multiplication. Make sure you're doing all of that accurate as well.